everyone, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, like I promised last week, we're going to go through the 5 stages of grief. And this model, as you can see behind me, is adapted from the Kubler-Ross grief model. And so in Elizabeth Kübler-Ross's book on death and dying, she writes many other novels, but specifically on this one, she talks about this model, and that's what we're going to walk quickly through today. Make sure you guys stick around to the end of the video because I'm going to be giving away something at the end, so make sure you stick around for that. Also, I just wanted to quickly announce that spots for my one-to-one are opening up, so if you'd like to schedule a free consult, make sure you use the link down below. And I'm also going to be giving away a free success path, my success path that I've used with my clients and that I've used personally on my own journey through grief and loss. It's a path that helps you connect to your loved one again. Specifically with my clients, I help them connect with their children. I help moms connect with their child on an emotional level. So this is the path that I take my clients on, and this is what I'm going to share with you guys. So make sure you click on that link because then you can get access. So the first stage of the Kubler-Ross grief cycle is denial. And denial quickly sets in after a loss. We talked in last week's video about how loss can mean many things. We talked about loss being a divorce, the loss of a job, the loss of a loved one, the loss of connection, which is what I focus on with my clients. Loss of connection with a child is usually what parents come to me for. So denial is essentially when we're trying to avoid reality, right? We are just kind of numbing ourselves to this situation. We don't want to really focus on what's happening in our lives, and we kind of just tune out. That's kind of what happened to me as well when I went through this on my own journey. You know, after the falling out of my relationship with my mother, it was as if it didn't really happen. It was as if none of the mistakes that she made really happened, and I kind of just numbed the pain and I didn't want to think about it too much. So this is a normal response. It's our body's almost a defense mechanism. It's a coping mechanism that we use so we aren't so emotionally overwhelmed. And this is usually the first step because it's our body's initial reaction to the loss. So we tend to block out words that people are saying. We block out the facts. We don't really associate with our loved ones or friends and family. And it is usually the stage that people encounter for the longest. Sometimes it's the stage that people are in for the entire duration of their grieving process. It can be difficult at times, right? And just know that it is a temporary response, at least in most cases. But the second stage is that anger stage. And usually the anger sets in when we are jumping back into reality. So it's when the numbing process is over and our body is just trying to fight everything and anything. And anger can come out in our reactions to certain situations. Anger can come out on our family, our friends, our coworkers. It can come out essentially anywhere that it needs to. And I think it's important to note that we may not necessarily be angry at those people, but we need to put our anger somewhere, right? And it's really hard, especially when you're a parent going through loss, because sometimes, if not most of the time, our initial reaction is putting that anger into our children. And this is exactly what happened to me. This is exactly what happened to my mother. And she really put her anger on us. She didn't really know how else to handle her anger. She didn't have the proper strategies in place and the proper coping mechanisms in place to go through that anger and not really relinquish it on everybody else. And so I think it's hard, very hard for a parent to kind of go through that grieving process when, you know, there is so much anger and overwhelm and frustration, and sometimes our children don't always understand what's happening. So I always tell my clients and I tell parents in our Facebook group that when they're going through this grieving process, it's okay to feel vulnerable and open about your anger and your sadness and your frustration with your children, because they do need to hear that. They do need to know that this anger is not just coming from nowhere, and it's actually coming from, you know, these things that you're trying to fight internally, the loss that you went through and the grief that you're now going through. It has a meaning and it's impacting the way you're responding to certain situations. So it's going to help them understand that your temper and your frustration and the screaming and the yelling isn't just something that they're doing, and it's not going to attack their well-being, and it's not going to affect their behavior in some ways. And that's why I do what I do, because I've seen it and I've lived it. I've lived it in my relationships, and it can be very hard, especially that anger process. I think anger is definitely one of the hardest to navigate, especially while being a parent. The third stage is bargaining stage. I think I did go through this at some point. There were multiple stages that I went through because I had a lot of loss in my life. And bargaining, I only went through with the loss of my father. And typically how people really talk about this stage is that you're kind of making a deal with God or higher power, or whatever you want to call it. It's essentially like your body is going back into that denial stage. You're like, okay, well, maybe I can bring them back, or maybe I can bring this job back, or maybe I can fix my divorce, or maybe I can really connect with my child again. And it's when you're trying to tell that person or that higher power that if you bring this back or this person back, then you'll do this, or then you'll behave a certain way. So it's as if we're trying to fight what's really happening in reality. Again, this is important to note that it is a normal reaction of our feelings on helplessness and vulnerability. So we kind of need to go through this process in order for ourselves to regain control, essentially. So bargaining is, in a sense, where we're just trying to see if maybe we can get a little bit back. After this stage, we then head into the depression stage. So that's really when these feelings of sadness and slight acceptance come into play, as we're trying to really understand that, okay, this is now our new reality, and we're beginning to face what life might look like without that person, or without that friendship, or without that job, or without that, period of time in our life that we've lost. So the depression stage actually has two types of depression involved. The first is our normal stage of depression, where, you see that sadness and that overwhelm, and, when our body is physically reacting to that loss, and our emotions are coming up, and, it's coming to play in the way we behave with people around us. But the second stage is a little bit more subtle and more private. And the way it differs is that it's not visible when we're reacting with other people, because the first stage is just our general sadness towards, the outer world. And the second stage is when we are internalizing that sadness. The final stage is acceptance, and it's probably the most obvious stage. And it's also not a stage that everyone reaches, which is important to note. It's a stage when we finally come to terms with what we've lost, and it's telling ourselves that it's okay, we're going to be able to do this. This is what life looks like, and I'm okay with that. I know how to move forward. I know how to navigate what life is going to look like without that thing. And it's just fully accepting of our new reality, so to speak. So that was just a brief overview of what those stages look like, and I just wanted to make a few points now that we've gone through all the stages. I know Elizabeth points out in her book that these stages are definitely not linear. I know personally, my graph, if I were to draw out my stage, it probably would have been like something like that, because I was definitely fluctuating from denial to anger, back to denial, and then to a little bit of bargaining, and then to anger again, and then the next stage, and the next stage. And some of these stages take a lot longer than others. And some of these stages we don't even go through at all because of that, that broadened definition of what loss is. We may not react or grieve the same way when we lose our job and when we lose a loved one. It's totally different. And so those stages are going to look a lot different, and some might be longer, some might be shorter, some we just might skip over entirely. So I think it's really just important to understand that wherever you are on your journey, you can just use this as a guideline just to help you get a better understanding of where you are and how you can relate to people. Because a lot of people have definitely gone through this cycle, and they can pinpoint times where they've definitely felt these feelings and they've gone through these stages when they've lost a loved one, when they lost their job, when they graduated, when they moved, when they gone through a divorce or knew someone who was incarcerated. It's something that applies to so many different areas and can still speak to so many truths and help us understand and navigate what we're going through and actually connect with people on the same level because, oh, that's where you are, that's where I was. Maybe I can help you. So the reason I wanted to talk about this cycle is just to help you get a better understanding of where you are. Maybe you're not sure where you are in the cycle, and that's okay, but just to get a better understanding that, you know, it's okay to go through these stages, it's normal to go through these stages, it's what happens when you lose somebody, it's what happens when you lose that connection, something that was a part of you that no longer is. With that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you guys learned something, got something out of this, and maybe you can get a better understanding of where you are on this journey and, you know, pinpoint yourself on this stage and this cycle. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.